The contract was 3 pages long, printed on paper so thin it felt like dried skin, and it said nothing about love. Marcus Vale read it twice, which was more than most people did before they signed their names to something that would change their lives. He was sitting in a small waiting room on the 42nd floor of the Valorian consulate in New Chicago, and the chairs were built for a body shape he did not have, so his knees stuck up at an angle that made him look like he was perpetually about to stand up and leave. He had considered leaving. He was still considering it. The woman across from him, her name was Solon Varis, junior cultural attaché, and her skin was the pale, almost white silver of a moon seen through clouds, watched him read with the expression of someone who had watched 100 humans read this document and had stopped finding their confusion interesting. "The compensation is standard," she said, "equivalent to 3 months' wages at the Tier 4 civil service rate." "I'm aware." Marcus turned the second page. "I'm reading about the personal conduct clauses. They are boilerplate. The boilerplate says I can't speak to the press, can't take photographs, can't discuss the arrangement with anyone outside a first-degree family member, and," he found the line, "I'm required to behave, in all public and private settings observed by Valorian nationals, as though my regard for the Lady Verath Dane is genuine." "Yes. How do they define genuine?" Solon blinked. Her eyes were a deep amber color, the irises ringed with a faint luminescent band that pulsed very slowly, once every 4 seconds approximately, which Marcus had counted during the wait. The word is a legal term of art in the Valorian Convention on Arranged Social Bonds. It means no visible contempt, no visible boredom, no failure to respond to social cues in a manner consistent with a bonded partner's attentiveness, and no public correction of the lady's statements regardless of their accuracy. That last one might be the hardest. "You've met her?" "No, but people who need someone to pretend not to notice when they're wrong are usually wrong quite often." Something shifted in Solon's expression, not a smile too controlled for that, but a slight softening around the amber eyes. "The Lady Verath Dane," she said, in a tone that could have meant anything, "is not wrong often. She is, however, accustomed to being unchallenged. The distinction matters." Marcus set the contract down. "Why me?" "Specifically, you came recommended." "By whom?" "The firm you work for, or worked for as of last week." He absorbed that. His former employer, Callaway Interspecies Relations, had let him go after the Terran summit collapsed, and the entire diplomatic liaison division was dissolved. 6 years of building small bridges between human bureaucrats and alien dignitaries, and when the funding dried up, they'd handed him a severance letter and a reference. Apparently the reference had included a note that he was available. "So I was recommended, because I'm unemployed and I speak Valorian." "You speak Valorian without an accent," Solon said. "You understand our social register, when to speak, when not to speak, when silence implies agreement, and when it implies challenge. You are the correct physical type for the role, within the range that Valorian protocol considers appropriate for a high-status bonded partner. You have no current romantic entanglements. And," a brief pause, "you are not afraid of her. The last 3 candidates were." "I haven't met her." "No, but you read the entire contract without flinching, which is more composure than the last 3 managed before the door opened." Marcus looked at the door she meant. It was a wide door, the Valorian scale, taller and narrower than a human one, framed in dark metal with a geometric pattern that hurt to look at directly if you stared too long. On the other side of it, presumably, was the Lady Verath Dane. "What does she need?" he asked. "Actually need?" "Not the contract language. What's the situation?" Solon was quiet for a moment. Then, as if deciding something, "She is the 3rd heir of the Dane line. Her older brother was expected to inherit the seat on the Valorian Council of Houses. He died 14 months ago in an accident that the family does not discuss publicly. The seat now passes to Verath, but the convention requires that a Dane heir of her rank and gender must present a bonded partner at the confirmation ceremony, or the seat reverts to a collateral branch. The ceremony is in 6 weeks. And she hasn't bonded. She has not bonded. She has not, as far as anyone can determine, ever come close to bonding. Her relationships have been, Solon chose her word carefully, brief. Brief because she ends them, or because they run away. Both, Solon said, depending on the relationship. Marcus picked up the contract again. He read the compensation number. He thought about his bank account, which had a sum of money in it that would last him approximately 4 months before he would need to take something desperate. He thought about 6 years of work that had taught him exactly how to sit in a room with someone from a different world and make them feel, not understood. That was too much to ask, but seen. He thought about the door. "All right," he said. "I'll meet her." The room behind the door was larger than he expected, lit by the cool blue-white light that Valorians preferred, close to the spectrum of their home star, which was older and whiter than Earth's sun. The walls were bare except for a single piece of art, a long horizontal panel of something that looked like brushed metal, carved with a pattern so fine it resolved into a landscape only when viewed from across the room. Mountains, or what passed for mountains on a world Marcus had never visited. The Lady Verath Dane was standing at the window with her back to him. She was tall, Valorians tended to be, with the characteristic secondary pair of shoulder blades that pressed in subtle ridges beneath the fabric of her jacket. Her hair was the color of old iron, dark silver shot through with threads of deeper gray, worn long and swept back in a way that looked effortless and had certainly taken time. Her skin was the same pale silver as Solon's, but darker at the joints and lighter at the temples, where Marcus could see the faint shimmer of what the Valorians called the Vethmark, a bioluminescent pattern unique to each individual, faint enough to be invisible in bright light, and visible only in the blue spectrum glow of this room. He did not say anything. He had learned in 6 years that the first words mattered more than most people thought, and that silence was often the more honest greeting. She turned. Her face was, he had expected severity, given everything he'd been told. He found something closer to exhaustion. She was younger than he'd pictured, or her face was. There was a tension in it that came from holding something at bay rather than from the weight of years. Her eyes were the deep amber of all Valorians, but without the luminescent ring, or with a ring so faint it was invisible in this light. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they're trying to decide whether to trust. "You're the human," she said in Valorian. "I'm a human," Marcus said, also in Valorian. "Specifically, I'm the one Solon thinks might work." A short silence. Something shifted in her expression, not warmth exactly, but a recalibration. "You speak without the Chicago slant," she said. "I spent 2 years at the Valorian Trade Enclave in Helsinki. The tutors there were from the northern provinces. I am from the northern provinces." "I know, I looked up the Dane line before the meeting." He paused. "The mountain range in your art piece, that's the Velith Reach, northern coast." She looked at the panel on the wall, then back at him. "Solon said you were observant. Solon said you were unchallenged. I thought I'd start with something neutral before we get to the harder parts." Another recalibration. He realized, genuinely curious about what was behind the exhaustion in her face, which was a better starting point than he'd had with some clients. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me why I shouldn't send you away like the others." Marcus sat. He did not perform ease. He actually arranged himself comfortably, because the chairs in this room were also sized for a Valorian frame, but were at least padded adequately. "You shouldn't send me away," he said, "because I'm not afraid of you and I'm not impressed by you, and those are 2 qualities you apparently need in a person right now." She sat down across from him, not the chair directly opposite, the one at a slight angle, which in Valorian social geometry meant she was taking a position of evaluation rather than confrontation. He noted it and let it pass without comment. "Not impressed," she said. "That's an unusual opening. You don't want someone who's going to be starstruck. The role requires a partner, not an admirer. Admirers are easy to read as fraudulent. Partners are harder." "And what do you know about being a partner?" It was a direct question with a sharp edge. He considered it honestly. "I've been an effective one in professional contexts. Personally, I was in a relationship for 4 years that ended because I was better at understanding people from other worlds than people from my own. Whether that's a recommendation or a warning depends on what you need." She was quiet for a moment. The birthmark at her temples pulsed once slowly in the blue light. "And you understand what this is? A social bond arrangement for the purpose of fulfilling the convention requirement. 6 weeks, public appearances, the confirmation ceremony, and whatever intermediate functions are required. I behave as a bonded partner. You present as a woman who has bonded. Your brother's seat is secured. And when it's done, we part ways. I go back to my life, you go back to yours." He met her eyes. "I will not be difficult about it. I've done delicate work before. I know how to close a chapter cleanly." Vareth Dane looked at him for a long time. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside the city moved. He could hear it faintly, the low hum of New Chicago's transit grid, a sound so constant it became part of silence. "3 conditions," she said finally, "beyond the contract." "I'm listening." "You do not ask me personal questions unless I invite them. You do not attempt to extend this arrangement beyond the agreed period. No sentiment, no renegotiation, no." A slight pause, lingering. "And when we are in public, you do not make me feel watched." Marcus thought about that. "The third one is the specific one. What does watch feel like to you?" She looked at him carefully. "You just asked me a personal question." "No," he said. "I asked you a professional one. I need to know what behavior to avoid. That's logistics." A beat, then very quietly, more to herself than to him, she said, "Like a specimen." "Understood," he said. "I can promise you won't feel watched. I can't promise you won't be seen. That's different." She looked at him. The exhaustion in her face had shifted slightly. Not gone, but different. "Sign the contract," she said. He signed the contract. The first week was practical. Marcus moved into the guest suite of the Dane residence, a private building in the diplomatic quarter that felt like a house-shaped argument about whether to be imposing or beautiful, and had settled on both. His quarters were cool and blue-lit by default, which he could adjust, and the kitchen staff was human-trained and produced food that was technically correct and occasionally also good. He had a schedule. He attended a briefing with Varath's social secretary, a Valorian woman named Teschel, who spoke to him with the polite efficiency of someone quarantining their opinions for professional purposes. He was given a primer on the confirmation ceremony's protocols, the names and ranks of the house families who would attend, the specific points at which a bonded partner was expected to be visible, attentive, and at ease. He did not see Varath on the first day, or the second. On the third day she appeared at breakfast, or rather, he was in the breakfast room when she arrived, and she sat down across from him and poured herself something that smelled like strong tea and did not greet him, which he took to mean good morning. "What are you reading?" she asked. He held up the book, a physical one, paper, which he preferred for slow reading. Valorian property law. There's a clause in the convention about the asset transfer requirements for bonded partners in council family arrangements. I want to understand what you'd technically be obligated to transfer, if anyone looked closely at the paperwork. She looked at him over her cup. "Why?" "Because if anyone looks closely at the paperwork, I want to be able to answer questions without hesitating." She set the cup down. "No one will look closely at the paperwork." Someone might. Why would anyone? She stopped. Then slowly, you think the collateral branch will investigate? I think any family that stands to inherit a council seat and doesn't inherit it will look for whatever they can find. What's the collateral branch like? Verath was quiet for a moment. My cousin Rel is ambitious and meticulous. His husband is a lawyer. Then someone will look at the paperwork. Marcus set the book down and picked up his coffee. Which is fine. The paperwork is solid, but we should walk through the questions they'd ask so that when you answer them, you don't hesitate either. She looked at him with that evaluating quality she had, measuring something she wasn't naming. You're thorough. It's the job. It's more than the job. Teschel briefed you on ceremony protocols. She didn't brief you on family politics. No, I read about those in the public archives. He picked up the book again. You have good coverage of your brother's career, by the way. The obituaries were, he paused, kind. The silence that followed was different from the others. He felt it change texture. They were, she said very quietly. He had not intended to open that door. He did not try to step through it. He turned a page and let the silence settle, and after a moment Verath picked up her cup and the morning continued. They did this. Breakfast, separate days, occasional meals, and the shape of her became clearer to him in the way that shapes become clear when you're patient enough not to force them. She was disciplined in a way that looked effortless and cost her something. She was precise with language and frustrated when others weren't. She had opinions about small things, the quality of the morning light, the correct temperature for tea, whether a particular piece of music was being played too fast, that she expressed to no one and to rooms that happened to contain him, not quite to him, as if she was still deciding whether he counted. He was careful not to count too soon. The first public appearance was a reception at the Galactic Trade Council offices, which occupied 3 floors of a tower in the center of New Chicago and was furnished in the deliberately neutral style that said, "Everyone who walks through this door should feel equally out of place." Marcus wore what Teschel had selected, dark clothes in a cut that was formal by human standards, and within the acceptable range for a council family's bonded partner by Valorian ones. He met Verath in the residence's entrance hall, and she looked at him the way she always looked at him, with a slight delay before the evaluation resolved. "You cleaned up," she said. "I also own mirrors." He held out his arm, the Valorian custom, bonded partners entering formal spaces, the outer arm offered and accepted. "Ready." She took his arm. The contact was light, formal. A human would have called it careful. He adjusted his pace to match hers, which was the only practical thing to do and also something that made Teschel, who was watching from the corridor, blink slightly. In the elevator, descending to the car, she said, "There will be a woman at this reception named Davenport. She is the chair of the Terran Infrastructure Committee, and she will want to speak to me about the Northern Trade Route Resolution. Do not let her corner me for more than 10 minutes. What's my exit? You'll think of something. I will, but it's better if we have a signal so I don't choose wrong. She thought about it. I'll touch your sleeve, here. She indicated a point just below his elbow. Got it. Anyone else I should know about? My cousin Rel will be there. His husband's name is Sevar. They will be pleasant to you and attentive to everything you say and do. I'll be boring. Don't be boring. Boring looks like hiding. Be, she searched for the word, present. But unremarkable. Present but unremarkable. That's a very specific note. Can you manage it? I've been doing it all week, he said. The elevator opened. The car was waiting. He held the door. He managed it. He was present at her side in the way that a wall is present. Substantial, reliable, not the subject of the room. When people spoke to Verath, he listened with the attentiveness of someone who valued what she was saying, which required no performance because he genuinely found her precise and often correct. When people spoke to him, he answered easily. He had the conversation of a man who was comfortable in rooms like this, which he was, and who had nothing to prove, which was also true. He steered Davenport toward a pleasant impasse after 9 minutes by asking about the Infrastructure Committee's position on the Helen Corridor, which was a complicated enough topic that Davin forgot she had somewhere else to be for nearly 3 minutes before she found her way back out. Verath, walking away from that conversation, touched his arm 2 minutes after the signal point, which meant she'd noticed the Helen Corridor maneuver. "Good timing," she said quietly, when they were briefly in a corner with drinks in their hands and no one within earshot. "You set up the problem, I just found the lever." She looked at him. The Veth mark at her temples was faint here. The reception lighting was full spectrum, human standard, but he'd been looking at that faint shimmer long enough now that he could find it easily. "Rel is watching us," she said, not turning. "He's been watching us since we arrived. His husband has been watching us since the third introduction. They're both good at it. They use the crowd so you'd have to be looking for the pattern." "Are you good at it?" "I spent 6 years watching people watch each other in rooms like this." He sipped his drink. "Your cousin is trying to decide if we're real." "What do you think he'll decide?" Marcus considered. The question was honest and he gave it an honest answer. "I think he'll decide he's not sure." "Which is the best outcome? Certainty either way is a problem." Verath looked at him. "You think like a diplomat." "I was one technically." "You were a liaison, that's different." "How?" "A diplomat represents a position. A liaison," she paused, "facilitates. They don't have a position of their own." He was quiet for a moment, not stung, just thinking about whether that was true. "I have positions," he said. "I just learned when to keep them private." She looked at him with something that was not quite the evaluating look, something more open than that. "What positions?" "That's a personal question," he said. "I'll answer it if you tell me what you actually think of the Northern Trade Route resolution." A beat then surprising him, she told him. He hadn't expected to find her interesting. That was the honest accounting, in the quiet of the 4th week, sitting in the kitchen of the residence at something past midnight, because he'd woken up and couldn't sleep, and apparently neither could she. She was at the kitchen table with a tablet full of documents that she was reading with the concentrated frown of someone who had forgotten to stop working. He made tea, human tea, which she had politely declined the first time and accepted the second, and put a cup at her elbow and sat down with his own at a careful angle. "What are you working on?" he asked. She looked up. In this light, the kitchen light, warm and yellow, which she tolerated because it was late and the blue spectrum option required deliberate switching, she looked different. Not softer exactly, less composed. The precise set of her shoulders had loosened by a degree or two. "The water rights legislation," she said. "My brother was the lead sponsor. Someone needs to see it through." "Can you do that from a council seat?" "I could do very little else from a council seat if I chose to." She looked back at the tablet. "That's not what they want me for." "What do they want you for?" "Symbol," she said. "The Dane line unbroken. The northern province's interests represented. A face to put on 300 years of family obligation." She was quiet for a moment. "Ren would have been better at it." Ren, her brother's name, which she had not used before. Marcus held his tea and didn't move. "He was better at all of it," she said. "The room entering, the looking like you belong. I was always the one who," she stopped. "He was good at being seen." "You're not." "I'm being seen all the time right now," she said. "By your cousin's husband, by Teschel, by you." She said the last word differently than the others. He noticed. "I try not to make it feel like watching," he said. "You mostly succeed." She looked up at him. "What is it like, from the other side, watching someone and trying not to let them know?" He thought about it. "Like having a window open in a room where you're working. You're not looking at it. But you know it's there." She was quiet. Then, That is not what I expected you to say. What did you expect? Something about professional detachment, a pause, something at a distance. I'm not at a distance, he said. I've been sitting across from you at breakfast for 3 weeks. She looked at him for a long time in the kitchen light. The Vethmark at her temples pulsed, slowly, visible now in the warm spectrum. He had read, years ago, that the mark was involuntary. It responded to emotional state, slightly, in ways that Valorians could suppress in public with practice but not completely in unguarded moments. He looked away before she could notice that he'd noticed. You should sleep, he said. There's the Hallen House dinner tomorrow, and Teschel wants us there by 7. I know when the dinner is. Then go to sleep, Verath. It was the first time he'd used her name without a title. He hadn't planned it. She went still. Then very quietly, good night, Marcus. He understood in the 5th week that he had made a mistake. Not a failure of the contract, nothing he could point to in the 3 pages of paper-thin documentation and say, here, this is where I failed to meet the standard. He had met every standard. He had been present and attentive and unremarkable. He had managed Davenport and Rel's watching and the Hallen House dinner, and a small private lunch with 2 members of the Dane family's advisory circle. And at every point, he had felt Verath at his side in the specific way of someone who had learned, without acknowledging it, that the person there would not fail her. The mistake was simpler than that. He had stopped thinking of this as a job approximately somewhere around the 2nd midnight in the kitchen, and he had not told himself the truth about it until now. It was 5 days before the confirmation ceremony, and they were at a gallery opening. A young Valorian artist, newly arrived on Earth, work that bridged the 2 visual traditions in a way that made Marcus look at it twice, and then a 3rd time. Verath stood beside him in front of a piece that was all careful, scratched-in lines, suggesting something enormous at the edge of visibility. What do you see? She said. Something that isn't there yet, he said, or something that's always been there and is just becoming visible. She looked at the piece for a moment. I see the Velith reach in winter, she said, the week before the ice breaks, when everything is still and you know something is about to change but the world hasn't caught up yet. You miss it, he said. I haven't been home in, she calculated, 11 months. My work is here. The ceremony is here. A pause. After the council seat is confirmed, I'll return for the winter season. My family's estate is in the mountains. The one's in the art piece in your office. Yes, she was quiet. Ren and I used to, she stopped, started again. We used to walk the ice ridge above the estate in January. He said the cold was the only honest thing about winter. Everything else was waiting. Marcus stood beside her and looked at the art piece and did not say anything about what she had just given him, which was more than she'd given anyone in the weeks he'd known her. He filed it very carefully. He would not use it and he would not waste it. Do you have something like that? She asked after a moment. Somewhere honest. He thought about it. There's a lake in Ontario where I grew up, in November before it freezes. The light does something specific in that particular 3-week window. It's lower and more golden and everything looks like it's about to become a memory. He paused. I don't go back often. Why not? It's complicated. My family's, he paused. We're close in the way of people who find closeness difficult. She looked at him. That's the first personal thing you've told me. You asked. I've asked you personal things before. You've asked about my qualifications, he said. This is different. She was quiet for a moment. Around them, the gallery murmured, soft conversations, the clink of glasses, the low music of a room full of people who were mostly pretending to understand art. 5 days, she said. 5 days, he agreed. He did not say, and then it's done. Because something in his throat closed around that sentence and wouldn't let it out. The 2nd week brought invitations. a Valorian cultural evening hosted by the Trade Enclave, a joint human Valorian scholars luncheon, and a private dinner at the home of council member Haleth Vor, who was senior enough that declining was technically possible and practically not. Marcus attended all three. He and Verath moved through them the way people move through weather, not fighting it, just navigating it together with the small adjustments that come from proximity and attention. At the scholars' luncheon, a human professor from the University of Edinburgh asked Marcus what his field had been. He said diplomatic liaison. The professor asked if that was rewarding work. Marcus said it had been the kind of work where the reward was mostly knowing you'd made something a little less likely to go wrong, which was not glamorous but had its satisfactions. The professor nodded with the recognition of someone who knew that feeling. Verath, who had been in conversation with the professor's Valorian counterpart, paused very slightly when she heard that. She said nothing, but later in the car back to the residence she said, "That's what you miss about it, the liaison work." "I didn't say I missed it." "You described the reward with some care," she said. "People don't describe things carefully unless they matter." He looked at her in the blue dark of the car interior. The city lights moved across her face. "You were listening to a separate conversation." "I have very good hearing," she said. "It's a Valorian trait." "You never mentioned that." "You never asked." He thought about the implications of this, which were significant. "What else have you heard that you didn't mention?" A pause. "The night in the kitchen when you said you were not at a distance," she said. "You added something under your breath." He held very still. "You said," she paused, "and that's the problem." He'd thought it was below audible range. He'd been wrong. "Well," he said. "Yes," she said. They rode the rest of the way in silence that was no longer the same kind of silence it had been before. The third week he met her mother. Council member Dane, the Lady Verath's mother, who bore her own considerable reputation in the Valorian political world, arrived at the residence on a Tuesday afternoon with no warning and the specific composure of a woman who gave warning only when she chose to. She was older than Marcus expected and smaller than he expected, with the same iron-gray hair as her daughter but worn shorter, and eyes that were the same amber but with the full luminescent ring, the mark of age in Valorians, which ran not toward gray but toward light. She looked at Marcus for a long time. "You're smaller than I pictured," she said, not unkindly, as information. "Most humans are," he said, "by Valorian standards. And yet you do not seem small." She looked at him with the evaluating quality, the same one Verath had, he realized, just older and less guarded about using it. "You speak our language without the Chicago slant." "Northern Province tutors," he said. "Northern Province tutors," she repeated. "And you've been living in this house for 3 weeks. You've been attending the functions. Teschel tells me you are thorough." "Teschel is generous." "Teschel does not do generous," the lady's mother said. "She does accurate." She glanced across the room, where Verath was watching this exchange with the expression of someone who was trying to appear neutral. "My daughter tells me very little. She never has. That quality used to concern me. Now I find I prefer people who speak only when they mean it." "She means what she says," Marcus offered. "Yes," the older woman looked at him. "And what do you mean, Mr. Vale?" It was a direct question. He gave it a direct answer. "I mean that I'm here because I was asked to be, and that over the past 3 weeks I've discovered that the line between that and wanting to be here is less clear than I expected." The lady's mother looked at him for a very long moment. The luminescent ring in her eyes pulsed once. "Ren liked you," she said. Marcus went still. "I never met." "He read your resume when Solon was vetting candidates." She looked at the window. "He said this one's a keeper." Then she stopped. "It's difficult to know whether to be grateful for the prescience or angry that he isn't here to see it." The room was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, "about your son." People say that, she said, not dismissively, just noting it. Very few people mean it the way you seem to. She stayed for 2 hours. She ate tea and a plate of small foods that the kitchen staff produced with admirable speed. She spoke with Verath about the ceremony logistics, the collateral family's positioning, and a minor legal question about the convention documents that was not minor at all. She spoke with Marcus about 3 separate topics: his work history, the Helen Corridor infrastructure question, and a piece of music she'd heard at the scholars' luncheon and wanted identified. And she watched the way he and Verath occupied the same room with the attention of someone doing a long and careful calculation. When she left, she said to Verath, "Don't complicate this." Verath said, "I'm not complicating it." "You complicate everything that matters," her mother said. "It's a family trait. The difference is that some of us learn eventually to stop." She kissed her daughter's temple over the Vethmark, which was the Velorian gesture of a parent blessing a child, and which Verath stood very still for. "Don't make the same mistake twice." The door closed. Verath stood in the hall and was quiet for a moment. "What mistake the first time?" Marcus asked. "Letting someone go," she said, "because I convinced myself the timing was wrong." He absorbed that. "Was the timing wrong?" he asked. "The timing," she said, "was irrelevant. I was afraid." She looked at the door. "It's very annoying to have your mother be right about something this significant." "She seems like a person who is right about significant things often." "Always," Verath said. "It's genuinely irritating." But there was something in her face that was not irritation at all. He almost told her on the 4th day. They were in the residence, late afternoon, going through the confirmation ceremony sequence for the 3rd time because Teschel believed in preparation, and was probably correct too. The ceremony required a specific moment, the presentation of the bond, which in a real bond was a private ritual with public acknowledgement, but in their case was a formalized demonstration. The bonded partner would stand at the lady's right hand and place his hand over her Vethmark. "It will be visible by then," Verath said. "The ceremonial lighting is full spectrum in the first phase and then shifts to the blue-white for the presentation. In that light, it will be very clear." "I know what to do," Marcus said. "I've read the protocol." "It's different than reading." She was standing very still. "You'll need to," she seemed to hesitate over the word, "touch it." "I know. It's an intimate gesture. In actual bonds she stopped. "Significant," he said. "Yes." He stood in front of her in the blue-tinted afternoon light of the residence's formal room, and the Vethmark at her temples pulsed slowly, slowly. He had read about this in the ethnographic literature, once years ago, that the mark was sensitive to contact from a bonded partner, that the response it showed was involuntary, that Velorians considered this a private thing. "We should practice," she said, "not quite an order, something that was asking permission by calling itself a command." He raised his hand and placed it very carefully against her temple. The Vethmark brightened under his palm, just slightly. Just enough. He did not move, she did not move. The afternoon light was very quiet. "Good," she said after a moment. Her voice was precise and level. "Good," he agreed. He lowered his hand. Neither of them looked at the other for a moment. The afternoon had gone very quiet. 4 days, she said. Right, he said. He had not told her. He did not tell her. But something in the architecture of the space between them had shifted, and they both knew it, and neither of them named it because naming it before the ceremony was a kind of pressure they had not agreed to put on each other. That night he sat in his room in the residence and looked at the document on his tablet, the bank notification confirming the payment schedule, and thought about what came after. He had a standing offer from a firm in Vancouver that did cross-species mediation. He had a former colleague in Helsinki who had mentioned, 3 months ago, an opening at the trade enclave. He had a life that had been on pause for 6 weeks, and that was, technically, about to resume. He closed the tablet. He thought about a woman who had said, in a narrow corridor of yellow light, that she found it difficult to end something that hadn't, in her mind, started as a thing worth ending. He thought about the weight of that and how he'd been carrying it for a week, and it didn't feel like a burden. He thought for days. 3 days before the ceremony, Teschel appeared at his door at 9 in the morning with a tablet and the expression of someone who had something to say and had been deciding how to say it. "There's a development," she said. He let her in. She sat. She pulled up the tablet. "Rel's husband filed a query with the convention office yesterday," she said. "A formal request for the documentation record of the bond arrangement. Dates, preliminary declarations, the filing confirmation. They're entitled to request it under collateral branch provisions." Marcus was quiet. "Is the documentation solid?" "The documentation is complete and correctly filed." She looked at him. "The documentation will satisfy any legal review." "That is not the question." "What's the question?" "The question," she said, choosing her words with precision, "is whether there are aspects of this arrangement that a thorough inquiry, beyond the legal documentation, might complicate." He understood what she was asking. "Teschel," he said, "how long have you been working for Verath?" 4 years. "And in those 4 years, how many times has she let someone close enough to matter?" Teschel was quiet for a moment. "Once before," she said, "it did not end well. And since I arrived." She looked at him. She was Valorian. Her face was composed in the way of her people in professional settings. But he had spent 6 years reading Valorian faces, and he could see the calculation happening behind her amber eyes. "The documentation," she said finally, "will satisfy any legal review. That is all I am required to confirm." A pause. "I want to be clear that I am not obstructing a deeper inquiry." "I know," he said. "I am also not encouraging one," she said. "I know that too." She stood. She tucked the tablet under her arm. At the door she paused. "She is better," Teschel said, not looking back. "Than she was 4 months ago when the brother died and the seat fell to her and she stopped. She is better. I don't say that as an observation. I say it as," she paused, "information." "I'll take care of it," he said. Teschel left. He sat for a moment in the morning light and thought about information. Then he got up and went to find Verath. The day before the ceremony, Rel came. He came without notice and was admitted because he was family, and Marcus was in the residence's main corridor when Rel walked in, a tall man, the same silver Valorian skin, with the specific composure of someone who had rehearsed this encounter. His husband Sevar was with him, watchful and quiet. Rel looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Rel. "Mr. Vale," Rel said pleasantly, "I wonder if we might speak." Verath appeared at the end of the corridor. She had heard the door. "Rel," she said, "this is unexpected." "Family should be unexpected sometimes," Rel said. "Otherwise you only see them at funerals and ceremonies." He smiled. It was a good smile. He had practiced it. "I wanted to congratulate you. And to meet your partner properly." The next 40 minutes were the most technically demanding thing Marcus had done in the entire arrangement. Rel was good. He was meticulous and pleasant, as Verath had predicted, and he asked the kind of questions that were difficult precisely because they were not suspicious. Questions about where Marcus and Verath had met, the trade enclave they had agreed. She had attended a function. He had been liaison staff. What their courtship had been like, private, as all serious bonds should be, he said, and watched Rel absorb this without being able to disagree. What Marcus's plans were for the post-confirmation period. "I'll support whatever Verath needs," Marcus said. "The council seat is a significant commitment. We'll navigate it together." Rel smiled again. "And you're comfortable with the, I mean no offense, the Valorian aspects of the role, the cultural expectations, the family obligations." Vereth said. I only mean that it's a significant adjustment for a human. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. Marcus said calmly, I've been working in Velorian diplomatic contexts for 6 years. I'm reasonably calibrated. He met Rel's eyes. What you're asking, I think, is whether I understand what I've committed to. I do. Rel looked at him for a moment, then looked at Vereth, then looked back. You seem very certain, he said. I am certain, Marcus said. That was the alarming part. After Rel and Sevar left, Vereth stood in the corridor and was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, she said finally. It went fine. It went well, she stopped. You were very convincing. I wasn't performing, he said. She looked at him. The Vethmark pulsed once slowly. One day, she said, and this time she didn't say it like a countdown. The confirmation ceremony was held at the Galactic Convention Center's Velorian Formal Hall, which was enormous and cold and lit in the blue-white spectrum from the beginning, which meant that every Velorian in the room was slightly luminescent, their marks visible, their biology on display in the way that happened when their light surrounded them. Vereth stood very straight. Marcus stood at her right hand. He had worn what Teschel selected. He had reviewed the sequence. He had nothing left to do except be there, in the specific way she'd needed him to be there for 6 weeks, and let the room see it. The ceremony was long. There was address after address. The House representatives, the Council's senior member, the formal recitation of the Dane family's history in the convention. Vereth stood through all of it with the specific composure of someone who had been prepared for this her whole life and had not expected to be the one doing it. He watched her not watching her, the window in the room, and he saw the moment, somewhere in the second hour, when her stillness shifted from composed to something that was very close to breaking. Not visibly. Not to anyone who didn't know what to look for. He shifted his weight barely, so that his shoulder was closer to hers. She did not look at him, but her stillness changed. Then the presentation of the bond. He placed his hand against her temple, and the Vethmark brightened under his palm, not slightly this time. The blue-white light of the ceremony hall and the contact together pulled it fully visible, luminous, undeniable, and the room responded with the soft sound of Velorian witnesses who were seeing something real. She turned her head, just a fraction, so that her temple was more fully against his hand. He looked at her, she looked at him. He didn't know then what was true and what was ceremony. He suspected she didn't either. The reception that followed the ceremony was large and lit in the human comfortable full spectrum, and full of people who wanted something from the new council member. Marcus watched Vereth navigate it with the controlled ease of a person who had been trained for this, and who was, under the training, genuinely tired. He stayed close without hovering. He redirected conversations with the skill he had spent 6 weeks sharpening. He brought her a glass of something cool at the 40-minute mark, because he had noticed she always reached that point before needing to collect herself, and having something to hold helped. She took it without comment, which was the specific form of gratitude she gave for things she hadn't asked for and didn't want to have needed. Her mother found them near the far wall, away from the loudest clusters of conversation. The lady's mother looked at Marcus, and then at the glass Vereth was holding, and then at Marcus again, with the expression of someone whose calculation had just resolved. You knew she'd need that, the older woman said. It was predictable, Marcus said. Many things are predictable, she said. Very few people bother to act on them. She looked at her daughter. How are you feeling? Functional, Vereth said. That's not what I asked. Vereth looked at her mother. In the full-spectrum light, her Vethmark was nearly invisible, just the faint shimmer at her temples that Marcus had learned to find even when no one else was looking for it. She paused. Ren should be here. He is, her mother said simply. He's been here all day. You know how he was about ceremonies. he would have had opinions about every choice you made and been right about 2/3 of them. Something that was almost a smile moved across Verath's face. It was a painful thing to watch, and also a beautiful one. "The water rights bill," Verath said. "I'm going to see it through. I wanted you to know." "I know," her mother said. "You've been working on it since January. Teschel told me." She looked at Marcus. "She works too much." "I'm aware," he said. "Someone should tell her." "Someone has," he said. "Several times. She's thorough about ignoring it." Verath looked at him. "I'm standing right here." "I know," he said. "I'm reporting to your mother." Her mother laughed. It was a short sound, genuine, the first uncalculated thing Marcus had heard from her. Verath looked at her, startled, and then slowly her face relaxed into something that was not quite a smile but was the place where a smile started. Across the room, Rel was watching. Marcus met his eyes briefly. Rel looked away first. When the lady's mother drifted toward another group, there were, always, other groups, Verath turned to look at where she'd gone. "She likes you," Verath said. "She likes that I'm useful." "She likes that you're real," Verath said. "She can tell the difference. She's been able to tell the difference with people for as long as I can remember." She was quiet for a moment. "She told me last week that Ren would have liked you." "She told me the same thing," he said, "that he read my resume." Verath turned to look at him. "She told you that?" "She said he called me a keeper." Verath was very still. Her Vethmark pulsed once, twice, slow and luminous in the way it got when she wasn't guarding it. "That sounds like him," she said softly. He always knew, about people, within the first 5 minutes. A pause. He would have been relentless about it. He would have been making pointed remarks at every family dinner for the next decade. "I would have liked that," Marcus said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you," she said. The reception moved around them. Somewhere at the center of the room, someone was making a toast. The sound of glasses, of voices, of a night that was ending its formal portion and becoming something looser and warmer. "I should circulate," Verath said. "You should," he agreed. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Stay close." And he did. After, when the formal part was over and the reception had resolved into smaller conversations, and the principal players had dispersed to their houses and their politics, Verath found him in a side corridor, a servant's passage that connected the main hall to the building's back rooms, narrow and quiet and lit in warm yellow instead of ceremony blue. "It worked," she said. "It worked," he agreed. She looked at him. She had been looking at him for 6 weeks in many different ways, and this was a new one. "You should receive the remainder of your payment by the end of the week," she said. "Solon will handle the documentation." "Solon's efficient," he said. "She is," a pause, "Marcus." "Verath." She was quiet for a moment. In the yellow light she looked the way she'd looked in the kitchen at midnight, less composed, more present. The Vethmark at her temples was still fully visible. It would take time to settle back to its usual subtlety. "The contract ends tonight," she said. "I know. You'll return to she paused, "to whatever comes next for you." "I haven't decided what comes next," he said. "I've been slightly preoccupied." Something in her face changed. She looked at him with the evaluating look, and then the look that was past evaluation, that was more open than that he'd seen twice before and not said anything about. "If you were still," she started, stopped. "If I were still," he said quietly. "If the contract were not," she stopped again. He waited. "This is more difficult than I expected it to be," she said. "Which part?" "The ending of it," she said, and the way she said it made it very clear she was not talking about the ceremony. He stood in the narrow corridor with the woman he had spent 6 weeks being beside, and he thought about the window in the room, and the lake in November, and the way she'd said his name in the kitchen. He thought about the fact that Rel had looked at him and been unable to decide what was true. He thought about the fact that he had told Rel, with complete honesty, that he was certain. "It doesn't have to end tonight," he said. She looked at him. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," he paused. He was careful with words. She knew that about him. "It means I've spent 6 weeks finding you interesting and I haven't said so because the contract is clear about what the arrangement was. But the arrangement is over." Her Vethmark pulsed once in the yellow light. "Finding me interesting," she said. "And more than that. But I'm trying to be honest about the order of things." "What's after interesting?" "I'd prefer to find that out in a context where I'm not employed by you," he said. She was quiet, then very quietly, with the particular precision of someone who had decided something and was only going to say it once. "I was going to offer you the position again, on different terms, not 6 weeks, not a ceremony. She found the word, a continuation." "On what terms?" "Terms you'd have to help me write," she said. "Because I haven't done this. The actual version of this, I've done," she paused, brief. "Brief ended because they ran away," he said. "Or because you ended them." "Yes." "Which do you think would happen this time?" She looked at him for a long moment. The Vethmark was steady, fully visible, fully lit. "I think," she said carefully, "that you would not run." "No," he said, "I wouldn't." "And she stopped, started again. "I find that I do not want to end it." He stood in the corridor and let what she'd said take up the space it deserved. He had learned in 6 weeks that she did not say things like that easily. He understood what it cost. "Then let's write different terms," he said. She looked at him with eyes that were amber and exhausted, and more open than he had ever seen them. "You'll find it complicated," she said. "The council seat, the family obligations, she gestured all of this." "I know what I'm committing to," he said. "I told your cousin." "You told my cousin you were certain." "I was," he said. "I still am." The Vethmark at her temples pulsed slowly, steadily, luminous in the yellow light of the corridor, and she took one step toward him, and then the distance that had been careful and professional and 6 weeks long folded quietly into something else entirely. He had read once that the Vethmark of a Velorian who was seen, truly seen, without performance or fear, shone brightest in warm light, not cold. He thought, standing there, that the literature was correct. 6 months later, the water rights legislation passed the Velorian Council by a margin of 11 votes. Marcus was in the observer's gallery when the result was announced. He had spent the morning reviewing the final language with Verath's legislative aide, and the afternoon doing nothing except being in the building so that he was there when it happened. He watched her receive the count, the formal nod, the controlled breath, the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting for something for a long time. She did not look at the gallery. She knew he was there. The vote was recorded. The session ended. The chamber began to disperse. The aides collected their documents, and the senior members filed out in the specific order that council protocol required, and the room that had been charged and formal became a room that was simply large and emptying. In the corridor outside, the wide, formally lit corridor of the council building, where several aides and representatives moved with the efficiency of people who had been waiting to get back to their lives, Verath came out through the main doors and found him, because they had learned by now where to find each other. She stopped in front of him. 11 votes, he said. 11 votes, she said. He looked at her, the composure that was not performance, the precision that was not distance, the exhaustion that was not despair but was just the honest cost of doing something that mattered. He had been looking at her for 6 months now, and he still found her interesting. He suspected he would continue to find her interesting for a very long time, and that she would continue to be privately pleased about this and publicly circumspect about it, and that he would continue to notice the difference and say nothing about it unless she invited him to, which she did, Occasionally, in the kitchen late at night when the blue light option had been set to the warm yellow default, and the world was small and honest in theirs. He would have been pleased, Marcus said. She was quiet, the Vethmark at her temples pulsed once. He would have been insufferable about it, she said. He'd have quoted the margin for months. 11 votes is quotable. It is, a pause. Thank you for being here. I said I would be. I know. She looked at him with the open look, the one that had cost her something once and cost her less now, not because she felt it less but because she had learned slowly that he could be given things and not drop them. Let's go home. They walked out of the council building together, into the afternoon light of New Chicago, which was golden and low in the particular way of October, the light that came before things became memories. But this was not a memory. This was the week before the ice broke, the moment when everything was about to change and the world hadn't caught up yet. He thought, I am very certain. He thought I was right about that from the beginning, even when I didn't admit it. Beside him, Verath's hand found his. Her fingers were cool. His were warm. The contact was nothing like a ceremony and nothing like a contract, and everything like the thing that had happened between them slowly and without either of them meaning to plan it. She had written on a piece of that paper-thin Valorian paper new terms. He had read them carefully twice because he read important things twice. The terms were short. They said, no ending date, no compensation clause, no conduct requirements beyond the one she'd written at the bottom in her precise Northern Province handwriting. Be real with me. He had signed it immediately, without reading the fine print, which was the first time in his life he'd done that. He hadn't needed to read it. He already knew what it was. They walked. The city moved around them. The light was honest. And somewhere in the council building behind them, 11 votes sat in the record, and a man who had known how to see people from the first 5 minutes had, from wherever he was now, been entirely right.